Hey everyone. Welcome to AfriHeart Stories, your go-to spot for African tales. Don't forget to like, subscribe and drop a comment. Now sit back and enjoy. The early morning sun poured golden light onto the marble driveway of the Mensa estate. A convoy of matte black SUVs waited, their engines humming softly like obedient beasts. The gates opened as sharply dressed bodyguards moved in unison. Inside, Daniel Mensa buttoned his navy blue suit jacket and adjusted his cufflinks. Precision. Power. Presence. That's what today required. Mr. Mensa, your 9 a.m. board presentation is locked and loaded. We just need your final nod, his assistant, Max, said through the Bluetooth earpiece. Send it, Daniel replied, barely looking up from his espresso. As the car door opened, Daniel stepped out into the morning air. The scent of freshly watered roses from his garden clashed with the faint smell of city dust. His phone buzzed with updates, but something outside the mansion gates caught his eye. A figure, ragged and motionless, sat curled on the sidewalk near the traffic light. Beggar. She looked like a crumpled shadow in tattered clothes, her face hidden beneath a faded wrapper. Dirty plastic bags surrounded her like a fortress of survival. Daniel scoffed softly. This was the problem with the city, beauty and brilliance right next to brokenness. Let's go, he said, climbing into the SUV. The convoy rolled down the boulevard. Just as they slowed at the red light near the main road, the beggar lifted her head. Her eyes, dim but burning with something, locked with Daniel's through the tinted glass. And then, the moment, she mouthed something. No, whispered. Daniel leaned forward slightly. The window stayed shut. He couldn't hear her, but her lips moved deliberately. My son. His back stiffened. What? He muttered under his breath. Max turned from the front seat. Did you say something, sir? Daniel shook his head. Nothing. But it wasn't nothing. The boardroom at Mensa Global buzzed with quiet anticipation. Screens lit up, charts glowed with upward trends, and analysts whispered numbers with reverence. The directors sat upright. Investors had flown in. Everyone waited for Daniel, the genius founder and CEO. But as he entered, Daniel's face was oddly unreadable. He glanced at the laser pointer in his hand, but his mind had drifted. He cleared his throat. Thank you all for being here. Today we unveil our newest AI solution. The crowd leaned in. But Daniel's eyes flicked toward the window. And again, like an unwanted echo, came the image of her cracked lips mouthing those words, my son. He stuttered slightly, something he never did. Max noticed it immediately. A slide advanced without command. Daniel stared blankly at it. Mr. Mensa? One of the board members prompted. Daniel blinked. Yes. Apologies. As I was saying, our AI is designed to understand truth. His mind interrupted him. What if she wasn't just another madwoman? What if she knew him? He shook it off. The rest of the presentation went smoothly, at least on paper. Investors clapped, directors nodded, and cameras flashed. But inside Daniel, something had shifted. That evening, Daniel stood in his penthouse bedroom, staring into the mirror. The city skyline glittered behind him, but all he saw was his own face, hardened, refined, and polished. But beneath it was something ancient. A question he thought he buried years ago. He opened a small drawer and pulled out an old photograph, him at age 3. Curly hair. Big eyes. Sad smile. On the back, scribbled in faded ink, abandoned. 1990, found at Blessed Heart Orphanage. That word, abandoned. He hated it. It followed him in interviews, books, even speeches. The boy with no family who built an empire. They romanticized it. But what if that story was wrong? He shut the drawer violently. Don't be ridiculous, he told his reflection. People lie. Scammers prey on guilt. Still the whisper returned. My son. The next morning, Daniel was sharper than ever. His suit crisp, his schedule tighter. He drowned himself in meetings. He approved mergers, denied licensing, and signed contracts worth millions. But outside his building, he found himself standing in the parking garage, staring at the street lamp near the same corner. Driver, he called. Take me back through Riverside Avenue. The driver looked confused. Sir, there's construction. Just do it. The car cruised slowly. And there she was. The beggar. Still there. Same wrapper. Same plastic bags. Same eyes. But something was wrong. She wasn't sitting. She was slumped forward, her hand trembling, trying to lift a bottle of water. Daniel felt a jolt of panic, though he didn't know why. Stop the car, he barked. He jumped out and rushed to her. A few passers-by stared. A billionaire in a brioni suit crouching beside a beggar was not normal. "Madam?" he said uncertainly. "Can you hear me?" She barely moved. Her lips were cracked. One eye fluttered open. "Danny boy," she croaked. His blood turned to ice. "Call an ambulance," he shouted. In the emergency room, Daniel stood in the corner while doctors stabilized her. IVs, oxygen, murmured codes. It was chaos. But all Daniel saw was the woman's hand twitching slightly, as if reaching for something unseen. He paced. This wasn't supposed to happen. He just wanted answers. Not this. Finally, a nurse approached. "She's stable. Severe dehydration and fatigue." But she kept asking for someone. Daniel clenched his fists. "Who?" The nurse tilted her head. "Danny boy." He froze. The name. Nobody knew that name. Nobody. Except one woman in his earliest memory. A woman singing to him with a cracked lullaby, one hand stroking his hair. He had always told himself that was just a dream. Until now. The walls of Daniel's penthouse were covered in awards. Entrepreneur of the Year, Forbes 30 Under 30, National Innovators Medal. But none of them brought peace that night. He poured himself a glass of scotch and sat at the edge of the couch, eyes fixated on the hospital report the nurse had handed him. Grace Adebayo. Approximate, age 58. No known address. Dehydration. Exhaustion. Malnourishment. Mentally lucid but emotionally unstable. The name didn't ring any bells. But her voice, it did. That name, Danny boy, still echoed in his skull like a haunting lullaby. He closed his eyes and tried to remember. A soft song. A shadow of a woman. Braiding his hair. Whispering, "Mama's here." He had always believed those were manufactured memories. But the way she looked at him, it wasn't random. His phone buzzed. "Max, media's picking up rumors of you being seen near a hospital and a street corner. Want me to kill it?" "Daniel, no. Let it die on its own." But it wouldn't die. Not in his head. The next morning he arrived at Mensa Global looking tired. As he walked into his office, Max handed him a file. "What's this?" Daniel asked, scanning the folder. "You asked me to pull all your childhood records. From the orphanage. That's everything they had." Daniel nodded, flipping through yellowed pages. Arrival log. Health check. Vaccination cards. But one thing caught his eye, a name scribbled faintly on the side of a form. Grace. "Is this real?" he asked. Max frowned. Could be. Could be a social worker or a temporary foster parent. Or a mother, Daniel thought but didn't say. His heart beat louder. Later that day, Daniel returned to the hospital. She was awake now, sitting up slightly. She looked weak but alert. He stood by the door watching her. She turned slowly. Her eyes widened. "You came back," she whispered, voice hoarse. Daniel stepped in slowly. "Why did you call me that name?" She blinked. "Because it's your name. The one I gave you. No one calls me that. I used to. When you were little. When I fed you mashed bananas on the floor of our one-room flat. When I carried you on my back to the clinic because you had fever. You don't remember that?" He didn't answer. "Why now?" he asked. "Why come to me now?" "I never stopped searching," she replied, tearing up. "I just couldn't find you." Daniel clenched his jaw. "You expect me to believe that?" "No," she said softly. "I just needed you to know the truth before I die." That night, Daniel stood shirtless in front of the bathroom mirror. His fingers traced the small scar beneath his collarbone. He never knew how it got there, until now. Grace's voice echoed in his mind. "You fell down the stairs. I ran barefoot for 3 streets with you bleeding in my arms. Could that scar be the proof?" He didn't sleep. He sat at his desk, staring at the orphanage photo. That smile. That sadness. That same sadness he saw in her eyes. He played an old voice memo on his phone. One of his therapy sessions. "Do you ever wonder who your mother was?" the therapist had asked. "Sometimes," Daniel had answered. "But I tell myself it doesn't matter." Now it did. The next morning he walked into the hospital room. She looked up and smiled. "You came again." "I need answers," he said flatly. "I'll give them," she said, tears forming. "But please sit. Let me look at you." He reluctantly sat. She reached out and touched his hand. "You have your father's fingers," she whispered. "But your eyes, they were always mine." He flinched. "Tell me everything," he said. And she began. "I was 19, Grace began, voice trembling. "My parents threw me out the day I told them I was pregnant. Said I was a disgrace. I had no one. I sold rice by the roadside just to eat. She paused, sipping water. You were born in a room with no electricity. I cut your cord myself. You were quiet, too quiet, but you stared at me like you understood everything. Daniel watched her quietly. I carried you everywhere. I did hair for women in the compound while you napped on my lap. You were my world. So what happened? He asked. She took a breath. I got sick. Malaria. But a woman from church offered to help. Said she'd take you just for a week while I recovered. Daniel's eyes narrowed. She never brought you back, Grace choked. By the time I tracked her, she had vanished. They said she abandoned you at an orphanage. Why didn't you come for me? I did. Every week. But they wouldn't let me in. I had no ID. No money. No husband. They said I was unfit. I watched from the gate sometimes, until I stopped recognizing your face. Daniel looked away. Grace reached into a worn handbag beside her. I kept this, she whispered. She pulled out a cracked locket. Inside, a baby's photo. He stared. His hands trembled. That evening, Daniel met with a private investigator. I want a DNA test, he said. Now. Daniel couldn't sleep. The next morning, before the lab could even run the sample, he was already out the door. He needed to see for himself. Needed to retrace every step. He told Max to cancel all meetings. He returned to the same streetlight. The same corner. But she wasn't there. He got out of the car and walked the entire block. No beggars. No wrappers. No plastic bags. His stomach twisted. He moved further, scanning benches, alleyways, shaded spots under broken signposts. Sir, you can't walk around here like this, his driver said nervously. I don't care. Finally, at the edge of a food stand, a boy approached him. Are you looking for that mad woman? Daniel turned. What woman? The one that sleeps near the billboard. She collapsed this morning. They took her away. Where? Dunno. Some man in a yellow van helped her. Said he'd take her to the clinic. Daniel jumped into the SUV. Find every local clinic between here and the outer ring, he barked at Max over the phone. Now. Hours passed. 3 clinics rejected him. One had no record. Another had a woman who looked like her, but wasn't. Finally, at a dusty roadside shelter, a nurse stepped forward. You looking for Grace? She asked. Daniel nodded, breath caught. She collapsed just outside. She's stable now, but very weak. Daniel entered the small clinic. There she was, sleeping on a thin bed, her hands folded like prayer. He took a slow step forward. She stirred and without opening her eyes whispered, Danny boy? Daniel closed his eyes, overwhelmed. Maybe, just maybe, it wasn't a scam. Maybe she really was his mother. Daniel stood by the door, watching her shallow breaths. The clinic was dim, quiet except for the low beeping of the heart monitor beside her. Grace's face, now washed and clean, looked softer, less like a beggar and more like someone who had once known joy. When her eyes fluttered open, she smiled faintly. I knew you'd come, she said. Daniel hesitated. Why do you keep calling me that? Because I held you in my arms when no one else would. I rocked you when you couldn't sleep. You were my Danny boy. You still are. He sat beside her but kept his distance. I'm not that boy anymore, he said coldly. I'm a man now. A man who was abandoned. Her eyes welled with tears. I never wanted to let you go. Then why did you? Grace took a deep breath. You think I haven't punished myself every day for what happened? I searched every street, every corner, every orphanage. But they all told me you were gone. Do you know how that feels? Daniel looked away, jaw clenched. I needed answers, he muttered. I needed you when I was scared, when I had nothing. I was scared too, she said, voice cracking. But I never stopped loving you. There was silence between them, dense, aching silence. Then she whispered, Do you remember the lullaby? Daniel's eyes flickered. He nodded. She began to hum. Oh, soft. Just like in his dreams. And for the first time in years, Daniel wept. The DNA results arrived 3 days later. Daniel sat in his office, the sealed envelope resting untouched on his desk. Max paced nervously. You sure you want to do this? I need the truth, Daniel replied. He opened the envelope. He read. Positive match. 99.97%. She was his mother. His throat tightened. The room felt smaller. He leaned back in his chair, eyes staring at the ceiling. Max, he said quietly. Yeah. I have a mother. Back at the clinic, Grace was sitting up, peeling an orange a nurse had brought her. Daniel walked in still holding the report. She looked at him nervous. "Well?" she asked. He handed her the paper silently. She scanned it. Tears spilled before she even reached the end. "I told you," she said through sobs. "I told you I never lied." He nodded, lips pressed together. "It's official." Grace reached for his hand. He pulled back. "Daniel." "I don't know what to feel," he said, standing. "This changes everything, and nothing." She said nothing, just watched as he walked away. Outside, Daniel took a deep breath. A mother he never knew had returned. But could he ever call her that? Daniel returned days later, not with flowers or gifts but with questions. "Tell me everything," he said. "No lies." Grace nodded. She told him about growing up in Abeokuta. About falling for a man who disappeared when she became pregnant. About sleeping in markets selling pure water to survive. She told him about the day she fell ill and trusted the wrong woman. "She said she worked with the church," Grace whispered. "Said she'd take care of you until I got better. And she never came back," Daniel finished. "I went mad looking for you," she said. "By the time I found the orphanage, they had no record of her. No way to connect us." "Why didn't you go to the police?" "They laughed at me," she said. "They called me mad. Homeless. Said I probably sold you off." Daniel's chest burned with anger. "I stood outside your orphanage every Sunday. I saw boys come out to play and I tried to find you. But they chased me away like I was a criminal." Grace wiped her eyes. "I never stopped praying that one day, you'd see me." Daniel didn't know what to say. So he said nothing. But something inside him cracked. Grace was discharged from the clinic with a clean bill of health. Daniel paid for everything. But he didn't take her home. He arranged a temporary apartment and a caregiver. Everything top tier, but distant. Grace didn't protest. One afternoon, she sat by the window and looked out at the sunset. When Daniel arrived, she smiled. "Do you know what today is?" He shook his head. "Your birthday." He froze. "You were born just before the rains came," she said. "I wrapped you in a yellow shawl and prayed you'd change my life. And you did." He turned away. "Don't do this." "Do what?" "Act like we have history. Like we're family. You gave me life, yes. But you also vanished." "I didn't vanish," she said gently. "You were taken. But you didn't fight hard enough." Her face went pale. "You think I didn't bleed for you? That I didn't beg? You think sitting outside orphanage gates in the rain wasn't enough?" Tears welled in her eyes. "You think I didn't die every single day you were missing?" Daniel's voice dropped. "Then why does it still feel like you chose to leave?" Grace stepped back. Maybe because it's easier to be angry than to forgive." Daniel didn't respond. He left without a word. The next morning, the headlines hit like thunder. Tech billionaire's mother found begging on the streets. A blurry photo of Daniel crouched beside Grace near the streetlight went viral. Then another of him at the clinic. A journalist had been following the story from the day she collapsed. Comments flooded in. "So inspiring. Why did he wait this long? PR stunt. How could a billionaire let his own mother suffer?" Daniel sat in silence as Max read them aloud. "We can get it taken down," Max said quickly. "No," Daniel replied. "Let them talk." Grace, meanwhile, was silent. She had seen the headlines. Her photo was everywhere. She picked up the phone and called Daniel. "I didn't want this," she said. "I didn't mean to shame you." Daniel sighed. "It's not your fault. I should have handled this better." Max entered. "Our PR team says we should make a statement. Frame it as a charity effort. Emphasize compassion." Daniel looked at him. "No. We say nothing. Sir, if we don't control this narrative." "She's not a narrative," Daniel snapped. "She's my mother." Max fell silent. But when Daniel turned around, Grace was gone. Daniel stood in the middle of his apartment, staring at the empty couch where Grace had sat just hours ago. Her things were gone. Wrappers, slippers, even the tiny purse she always clutched. "Gone?" Max repeated. "What do you mean gone?" "She must have left after the call," Daniel muttered. "Or after seeing the tabloids." "Should I alert the security team?" "No. Let her be. If she doesn't want to be found, she won't be." Max hesitated. "We could still run with the charity story. I spoke to the head of our media partners. They could reframe it." Daniel snapped. "I'm not turning her life into a headline. But your shareholders. Let them pull out." Silence stretched. Finally, Max sighed. "All right. No charity stunt. But you need to know something." He pulled out his tablet and opened a video. It was Grace. Someone had filmed her exiting a church-run shelter earlier that morning. A reporter tried shoving a mic in her face. She didn't speak. She just shook her head and walked barefoot down the street. Daniel clenched his jaw. He never meant for this to happen. He just wanted to understand her, not break her again. Later that evening, Daniel found himself walking the length of his hallway in restless silence. He passed his awards, his skyline view, his $1,000,000 artwork, and none of it mattered. He pulled out his phone and opened his notes app. He stared at the blinking cursor for a long time before typing just one thing. Danny boy, come home. He deleted it, then typed again. If you see this, please let me find you this time. Daniel returned to Grace's temporary apartment. The caregiver had no answers, just an envelope Grace left behind. Inside was a single note, written on old paper in perfect cursive. You've given me peace, Danny. I no longer need a roof. I just needed to see your face again. Don't chase what doesn't want to be caught. Love, Mom. He reread it 4 times. He sat on the edge of the bed, still warm, and stared at the small things she left behind. A plastic comb. Her Bible. A cracked photo of him as a toddler, tucked in a wallet. It broke something inside him. She was gone. Not forever, but far enough to feel it. He pressed his hand to the mattress and whispered, I didn't mean to push you away. His voice cracked. I just didn't know how to let you in. Then the tears came, quiet but heavy. For the first time in over a decade, Daniel cried not from loss or fear, but from regret. Later that night Max called. Sir, are you all right? Daniel cleared his throat. She's gone. Where? I don't know. Max paused. Then what do you want to do? Daniel looked out at the stars above the city skyline. I want to understand her story. Daniel returned to the apartment the next day. While gathering Grace's remaining belongings, he noticed a worn-out mattress had been left behind. Something in him stirred. He lifted it. Underneath was a bundle wrapped in cloth, old, faded, but preserved with care. Inside, a journal. The cover was made from recycled cardboard. Inside were pages and pages of handwritten notes, dated as far back as 1992. The first page read, For Danny boy, just in case we ever meet again. His breath caught. He sat down and opened the journal. Each entry was a letter. Today would have been your 4th birthday. I made akara and gave it to the children near the orphanage gate, hoping they'd give you one. I saw you today. I think it was you. You were chasing a rubber tire. I stood behind the tree until the security man shouted at me. I tried to go in again. They locked the gate. But I saw your head through the bars. You had your father's curls. Daniel's hands shook. He flipped page after page. Birthdays, Christmases, moments of hope, pain, prayers. Every entry screamed one truth: she never stopped trying. By the last page, Daniel was crying again. How could he have doubted her? She had written to him for over 20 years, without ever getting a reply. And still, she had never stopped. That weekend, Daniel drove alone to the site of his old orphanage, Blessed Heart, now converted into a school. He stood at the rusted gate and imagined a young Grace standing there, clutching that journal. He looked around. A woman sweeping the yard looked up. Excuse me, he called. Did you work here a long time? I've been here since '95, she replied. Who are you? I was raised here, he said. Daniel Mensah. Her eyes widened. The quiet one with the sad eyes? He chuckled bitterly. That's probably me. She nodded. Your mother came here all the time. Daniel's heart stopped. You remember her? Yes, the woman said softly. The staff used to call her the gate lady. She came every Sunday. Rain or shine. Brought food. Gifts. But we weren't allowed to let her in. Daniel stepped back, speechless. Once, the woman continued, I saw her sitting across the street during Christmas, watching you play with the other boys. She never forgot me, Daniel whispered. No. She loved you more than anyone I've ever seen. Daniel turned away, face trembling with emotion. The woman added, You're lucky. Most of the children here never had someone come back for them. That night, Daniel stared at the photo in Grace's old Bible. It wasn't just a memory anymore. It was a legacy. The next morning, Daniel canceled every board meeting, international call, and tech summit. He called Max, clear my schedule. Indefinitely. Sir. I'm going to find her. Where? I don't know. But I'm starting where she started, with faith. He dressed in plain clothes. No suit, no convoy. Just him and the journal. He walked the streets where Grace once begged. Asked at churches. spoke with women at food banks, described her photo at soup kitchens. Most shook their heads. But at a small church near the river, an old woman recognized her. "Ah, Grace. Yes, she passed by last week. Said she was headed to Hope Shelter near Suralere." Daniel's heart leapt. "Do you know how to get there?" "Straight down to the bridge. But she said not to tell anyone she was going." He thanked the woman and set off. At Hope Shelter he found her. Not as a beggar, but wearing an apron, hair tied back, serving food to a line of children and mothers. She was smiling. Grace saw him and froze. For a moment no one moved. Then Daniel walked forward, dropped to his knees and whispered, "Please, come home." She reached for him. He wrapped his arms around her waist, burying his face into her. Around them people clapped. And Grace cried. The shelter was a modest 2-story building with peeling paint, rusted gates, and a long row of empty plates waiting to be filled. But to Daniel, it was the most beautiful place he'd seen. Because his mother, stood at the center of it. As Grace wept into his shoulder, murmurs spread through the courtyard. Some recognized him instantly. Others only knew him as the man from the news, the billionaire whose mother had been sleeping on the streets. But in that moment none of that mattered. "I didn't know if you'd come," Grace whispered, pulling back just enough to look at him. Daniel wiped her cheek. "I didn't come as a CEO. Or a brand. Or a scandal." He placed a trembling hand on her chest. "I came as your son." She let out a soft cry and pulled him back into her arms. Inside the shelter, Grace led him to a small corner where she slept on a floor mat beside 2 other elderly women. A clean plastic bowl, a Bible, and 1 pair of slippers were all she owned. "This is your life now?" he asked. She nodded. "I couldn't go back to your world. It was too bright. Too sharp. But here I'm useful. I serve food. I clean floors. I teach the little ones how to pray." Daniel swallowed hard. "You shouldn't be here." "I want to be," she said gently. He sat down on the mat beside her. "Let me take care of you. Give you a proper house. Clothes. Doctors. Everything." Grace touched his arm. "I didn't want riches, Danny. I wanted you. Now I have that." He dropped his head onto her lap. And for the first time in his life he felt safe. The next morning, Daniel held a press conference. The media buzzed. Cameras, microphones, reporters from every outlet. His PR team had begged him not to do it. Max warned it would stir up more scandal. But Daniel was resolute. He stood in front of the crowd, no script in hand, no teleprompter. Just truth. He adjusted the mic, took a breath. Then said, "I owe the world no explanation. But I owe her everything." The room went silent. "My name is Daniel Mensa. Billionaire. Inventor. Public figure. And yes, abandoned child." He glanced at the crowd. "Or so I thought." His voice wavered. "For years I believed my mother left me. But the truth is, she never stopped searching. She was shut out by a system that favored walls over windows. She was ignored, humiliated, and left with nothing." He pulled out the worn journal and raised it for the cameras. "She wrote to me every birthday, every Christmas, every day she missed me. I read them all. And they broke me." Gasps rippled through the room. "She's not a beggar. She's a survivor. A warrior. A mother." He paused. "I beg the world, stop judging people by their lowest moments. Because sometimes, they've already given their best." That night, Grace sat in her room at the shelter, watching the speech replay on a donated television. The other women clapped. She covered her face, smiling through her tears. Weeks passed. Daniel visited the shelter every Sunday. Not as a donor. Not as a headline. But as a son. He peeled yam with the cooks. Played ball with the kids. Cleaned toilets without cameras following him. Grace laughed more now. She began teaching the younger girls how to read. The shelter became her purpose, and Daniel respected that. But one evening he brought up something new. "I bought a house," he said as they shared bread on a bench. She raised a brow. "For what?" "For you. I told you." "Wait," he smiled. "It's not a mansion. Just a small 2-bedroom home. With a garden and a yellow door." She blinked. "Yellow? Like the shawl I wrapped you in?" He nodded. "I remembered." Grace's hands trembled. "And the backyard has a swing. For the kids at the shelter to visit. And a reading room with all your journals, framed." She put a hand over her heart. "Danny, you won't be alone," he said softly. "You'll be home." She wiped her eyes. "Only if you visit every Sunday." He grinned. "Every single one." The shelter threw her a farewell party. The women danced. The children sang. Grace walked out of that building, not as a homeless woman, but as a matriarch. And in the car, as they drove to the little house with the yellow door, she whispered, "Thank you for not giving up on me." Daniel smiled. "No, Mama. Thank you for not giving up on me." The little yellow house stood on the edge of a quiet neighborhood, just far enough from the city noise, yet close enough for the shelter kids to visit. It wasn't lavish, but it radiated warmth. A hibiscus bush grew outside the front porch. 2 small rocking chairs sat under a hand-painted "Welcome" sign. Daniel parked the car and helped Grace out. She stepped slowly onto the cobblestone path, eyes wide as she took in the flowerbeds and small swing set Daniel had built in the backyard. "This is really mine?" she whispered, voice trembling. He smiled, offering his arm. "Yours. Forever." Grace reached for his hand and held it tight, the same way she once held his as a baby. They stood there in silence for a while, mother and son, no longer broken pieces but a picture whole again. Inside, the house was simple but thoughtful. The living room held only what mattered: a bookshelf lined with Grace's favorite devotionals, a photo of Daniel as a baby now framed beside his adult portrait, and her favorite, a wooden frame etched with the words, "To the woman who waited." She walked slowly through each room like it was sacred. In the reading room she gasped. "You kept them?" she asked, pointing to the journals now displayed in glass cabinets. "All of them," Daniel replied. "Your handwriting raised me. Even when I didn't know it." She wiped away a tear. "I feel like I'm dreaming," she said. Daniel turned to her, his voice soft. "You're not. You're home." In the weeks that followed, something in Daniel began to shift. He still ran Mensa Global, but now he left the office by 5 p.m. sharp. On Sundays, his driver knew better than to wait. He was either at the shelter or gardening with Grace. And on Wednesday evenings he helped serve food at the local church kitchen. It became routine. Daniel in a simple polo shirt, handing out plates of rice, sometimes going unnoticed by people who had once written think pieces about his billions. One Wednesday night, a boy tugged at his shirt. "Mister, are you the man from the news?" Daniel looked down and smiled. "Which one?" "The one whose mommy got lost but came back." He chuckled. "Yeah, that's me." The boy grinned. "You look happier now." Daniel blinked. "I am," he whispered. At the yellow house, Grace began planting vegetables in the backyard. Daniel helped her every weekend. It was messy, grounding work, mud under the fingernails, aching backs, and the smell of the earth. But Daniel loved it. One Saturday, as they knelt beside the tomato patch, Grace chuckled. "You know," she said, "you've changed." He looked over. "How so?" "You're softer now. Not in a weak way, but lighter. Like the boy I used to carry." Daniel wiped sweat from his brow. "Maybe I finally stopped trying to carry everything alone." She patted his arm. "That's because you weren't meant to." He nodded. She continued, "All those years I thought I failed you. But maybe, just maybe, I raised you better than I thought." He glanced up. "You did." One afternoon, Daniel sat with Grace on the porch. The sun painted the sky orange and distant laughter from neighborhood children filled the air. He broke the silence. "You know, when I was in my 20s, I hated Father's Day." "Why?" "I didn't know who to thank. Or blame. I told myself I didn't care, but I did. Deeply." She nodded slowly. "And now? I realize I had a mother strong enough to be both." Grace smiled, tears brimming. "You don't owe me thanks, Danny." He turned to her. "I owe you everything." They sat in silence for a long time, hands interlocked. Then one Sunday something happened. Daniel showed up to the shelter early with 2 surprise guests, his board chairman and the CFO of Mensa Global. Grace frowned as they walked toward the dining hall. "What's all this?" Daniel handed her a folder. Inside were blueprints, donation documents, and architectural models. "Grace Foundation Women and Children's Shelter," she read aloud. "We're building a new shelter," Daniel said. "Under your name. You'll run it if you want. Your legacy." Grace's hands trembled. "Daniel, I'm just a mother." "No," he said gently. "You're the reason I'm the man I am. The world needs more of that." Her voice quivered. "I'm not worthy." He stepped forward, pressing her hands between his. "You never stopped praying. Never stopped writing. Never stopped loving. That's worth more than any empire I've built." She burst into tears and hugged him tightly. From that day, Grace became a beacon. Women who once avoided her on the streets now came to her for wisdom. Children called her Mama Grace. And Daniel? He kept showing up. He cooked. He served. He listened. One evening, as he helped an elderly man into the dining hall, a woman approached Grace and whispered, "That your son?" Grace smiled proudly. "Yes, that's my Danny boy." The sky was gray that morning. Rain danced softly on the roof of the little yellow house as Daniel parked his car by the curb and stepped out holding a basket of fruits and his mother's favorite tea biscuits. Inside, the home was quiet. He walked in and found Grace exactly where she always was on Sundays, on the rocking chair near the window, a blanket over her legs, Bible on her lap. Her breathing was light and her eyes were half closed. But today, she looked different. Paler. Smaller. As though her body had gently begun to fade. "Morning, Mama," Daniel said softly, setting the basket on the table. Grace turned slowly and smiled weakly. "You came." "I always come." She chuckled, barely audible. "I used to say that to myself every birthday. Maybe he'll come. Now look at us." He pulled a chair beside her. "I brought your favorite." She lifted the biscuit slowly and nibbled it like a child. "Tastes like peace." Daniel sat quietly watching her. He didn't want to rush this moment. Something told him time was folding itself in a different way today. "Did I ever tell you what you used to do when I sang to you?" she asked. He shook his head. "You'd fall asleep mid-cry. Like the song pulled the pain away." Daniel smiled, his voice thick. "Sing it again." Her lips trembled. And then, with the last of her strength, she began to hum. That same lullaby. Oh, slow. Like wind rustling through trees. Daniel closed his eyes, tears slipping down his cheeks. In her hum was every prayer she'd ever whispered, every letter she wrote, every birthday missed. She stopped, breath quivering. "Danny boy," she whispered. He opened his eyes. "I'm here," he said, taking her frail hand in both of his. "Right here." Her fingers curled slightly around his. "You became everything I dreamed you'd be." He bowed his head, forehead against her hand. "I only became that, because you never gave up on me." She gave a shaky smile, her voice barely more than a breath. "You were never abandoned. Just delayed." Silence followed. The kind of silence that isn't empty, but sacred. And then, her breathing slowed. Once, twice, still. Daniel stayed there, holding her hand long after the rain had stopped. He didn't cry. Not yet. Not loudly. Just quiet tears. Warm tears. Tears of release, not despair. A bird chirped softly outside the window. And the world felt different. He reached for the blanket and gently covered her. Then leaned in and whispered, "You'll always be my mother." The funeral was small, just as she would have wanted. No cameras. No media. Just shelter staff, a few church members, and the children who loved her. They didn't dress in black. They wore yellow. Daniel insisted. She was sunshine, he told them. He stood at the front, not as a CEO, but as a son. The wooden casket was adorned with hibiscus flowers, her favorite. He stepped up, clearing his throat. "She lived in the shadows so I could shine in the light," he began. But in truth, she was the light. People nodded, some sobbed. She wrote letters to a boy who never answered. But still wrote. She waited at gates no one opened. Still waited. He paused. "I used to think I built my life from nothing. But now I know, it was built from her love." A hush fell. "I wasn't the abandoned one. I was the found one. And I found her, just in time." After the burial, Daniel returned to the yellow house. Alone. He walked to the bookshelf and picked out the last journal she had written in, one she never showed him. Inside was just one page. "If I leave before you wake, just remember, my boy, I was proud every single day. Not for what you achieved, but for how you found your way back to me." He closed the journal and held it to his chest. And then he cried. Not because she was gone, but because she had given him everything. Weeks turned to months. Daniel continued visiting the shelter, now renamed the Grace Foundation. It expanded into 3 locations across Lagos, each filled with women rebuilding their lives and children finding family. At each building above the doorway was a plaque that read, "You were never abandoned. Just delayed. Grace Adebayo." One Saturday afternoon, a little girl with missing front teeth tugged at Daniel's shirt. "Uncle Danny," she said, "were you really the richest man in Nigeria?" He smiled. "Some say that." She tilted her head. "So why do you mop the floors like the rest of us?" He laughed. "Because once, a woman gave up everything for me, and I didn't even know it." This is my way of saying thank you. The girl nodded thoughtfully. I think she must have been a queen. Daniel knelt beside her. She was. She didn't wear a crown, but she had a throne. That night, Daniel walked alone to the garden behind the yellow house. The hibiscus bush had bloomed fully, bright red, reaching for the stars. He knelt by it, planted a kiss on the soil, and whispered, "Mama, I hope you're dancing where the streets have no gates." The wind rustled gently through the leaves. And for a moment, just a moment, he thought he heard her hum again. That same lullaby. Soft. Eternal. Liked it? Thumbs up, subscribe, and join the AfriHeart fam. Your support fuels our stories. Until next time.